This slide is about genre and rhetoric and understanding writing context. You'll need to watch this slide in order to write your first paper. So the first thing I want to talk about is genre and what genre actually is. You've probably heard the term genre before. Genre is used to categorize. Dictionary calls it types, kinds, and forms. So we use genre to categorize things like movies, music, and books. So you've heard of, when you think of music, you think of jazz or classical or rap or hip hop or pop or whatever. Those are all specific genres. In the world of writing, we categorize a lot of nonfiction writing, which is what we're talking about here, into more nuanced subcategories. Things like letters and emails, the ingredients on your cereal box, recipes, text messages, instructions. All of these are genres. They're all very different kinds of writing, but they are all genres. There are thousands of genres of writing. They all have identifiable patterns. Most of the time, if you see a specific writing act, you can identify what genre it is. Not always, but most of the time. But that's only part of what determines what a genre actually is. So rhetoricians, rather than determining genre by surface characteristics, we define genre by use. So here are some rather verbose definitions of genre. Freeman defines genre as typified response to a recurring rhetorical exigencies or recurring rhetorical contexts. Also, the reason of and reason for human interaction. So let me break down these definitions. What these are saying is that there is a thing that happens, something, a rhetorical exigence, a reason for speech acts that happens over and over. And because that particular need for a speech act happens over and over, we end up with a genre. For example, the syllabus that you have for class, that you get for every class that you have, is a genre. So from the beginning of education, the need to convey ideas to the students at the beginning of the semester. Here is my attendance. Here's how you'll be graded. Here is my policy on cell phones in class. Well, they probably didn't have those at the beginning of time, but so all of the different rules for class, prerequisites, the textbooks you'll need, the need to communicate all of those things to the students happened over and over and over and over. As a result, we ended up with the syllabus. So the syllabus is born from this recurring exigence or context, and that is where we come up with a genre. Okay, so this becomes a recognizable response. You go to class and you expect a syllabus. If you didn't get one, you would find it really odd. It also creates responses. Any genre is meant to communicate something that also creates a response. So a syllabus, for example, is meant to create a response, which in the case of a syllabus is a sort of a contract. By continuing with the course after reading the syllabus, you have entered into a contract with your professor that says, I agree to these terms. So that is what rhetoricians use as a more distinct and understandable way of defining genre. So why does genre matter? All the genres have these key aspects that fit the genre. So they all have a form. They tend to have similar forms. They tend to have similar tone, style, length, and diction. For example, a recipe, if you are going to look up a recipe, they're all going to have a list of ingredients and instructions for cooking those ingredients. They'll all be relatively informal. They're usually pretty short. They use the same language over and over. If you don't know what a cup is, you might be in trouble. It doesn't mean any cup. It means a measurable cup. So recipes are a very specific genre, but they don't all look exactly the same. The important part of this is that even though genres matter as far as form goes, it's the purpose of the genre that is more important, because the genre does not equal a template. So let me explain. The audience that you are writing toward is going to be pretty similar for most audiences. A syllabus is written for students. A text message is written for your friends. A newspaper article is for the general public. A Sports Illustrated article is for people who like sports. So the audiences for genres is usually quite similar. The audience for a recipe is the cook, right? But you need to know your audience in order to choose your tone, your diction, your form, and to make sure you're meeting the expectations of your audience. So the need for these things sometimes changes. Let me give you an example. A eulogy is a very specific genre, but you can go to 3 funerals and hear 3 very, very different eulogies, and that's going to depend on the country, the culture, the family, the religion. The variety of eulogies is innumerable, right? Because even though it's a eulogy and it's a response to a recurring situation, you can't say that's not a eulogy because it doesn't fit a template. They all are going to have a lot of variations. So templates are not necessarily genres. It's the audience and the purpose that determine the genre. So some genres in action. Here's a syllabus. Here are 2 syllabi, as a matter of fact. So the first one I just pulled offline. It's a random syllabus. It probably looks very similar to what you're used to, but it's not the only way to create a syllabus, because if you compare this to my syllabus, you'll see that they're nothing alike as far as how they look. The tone and format are similar, however, because they're very instructional, rule-oriented. It's the teacher speaking directly to the students and saying, this is what we're doing, and here's what's going on in the class. The audience is pretty much always students, right? So if we look at the purpose for a syllabus, you can see that the purpose is what is recognizable in these things, right? Not necessarily the form. They're going to look different. And I'm sure that even the first one that is just text and doesn't have the call-out boxes and stuff, or the pictures, is different for every class that you take. They're all going to look different, right? And I think this grocery list illustrates that use is the most important part of understanding genre. So we have 2 very different lists here, right? Both of them you can recognize as a grocery list. One because it says grocery list on it, but you can still recognize it as a grocery list. The second one is the most recognizable grocery list, right? Bread, milk, eggs, fruit. Just a list written on a piece of paper. Now think about choices made here for these particular genres, right? Audience and purpose is incredibly important, because if you think about the second list where it says bread, if I have this list and I go to the store, I know exactly where to go. I know exactly what kind of bread I eat and what kind of bread I want. I know what brand I want. But if I gave this to someone else and said, would you please get me some bread, and they came home with that really mushy white Wonder Bread stuff, I'd be very unhappy. I don't like Wonder Bread. I think it tastes like mush. So this is only appropriate for an audience of me. It's not appropriate for anyone else. You can't give someone a list that says bread, milk, eggs, and fruit and expect them to come home with exactly what you're looking for. So even though the genre is clearly recognizable by form, the purpose is very different. So you really want to think about how these choices are made when you look at genres that are actually in action. So part 2. After we're done thinking about genres, I want you to think about rules, conventions, and myths. And I want to start with the idea of the 5-paragraph essay. So first of all, let me impress upon you the idea that a genre does not equal a template. They're not the same thing. You can find templates of genres, but they don't have to fit a specific mold. And I want to impress upon you the idea that the 5-paragraph essay is not a genre. It does fit a template. It does fit a mold, but it is not a genre. There is no use for a 5-paragraph essay. It is not a response to a recurring context. It does not meet any communicative need, and it is not part of any social interaction. I challenge you to go out into the world, the real world, outside of school, and find a 5-paragraph essay. The fact is, they don't exist. Now, I understand that they are used in middle school and high school to teach specific ideas and skills, like making sure you have a point, which is called a thesis statement, and making sure that you support your thesis statement with evidence. And those are your body paragraphs, right? Those things are important, but the 5-paragraph essay needs to go. You should never write a 5-paragraph essay ever again. You've taken your SATs, and so you don't need to write these dumb things anymore. Okay? So that's the first myth that I want to dispel. So there are 3 kinds of rules. I want to talk about writing rules here. The first are what I call real rules. They just exist as part of our speech, and they are understood, and very seldom will you hear people breaking them. The only one that does is Yoda in Star Wars, right? You say the book, not book the. And you say he's wearing a green shirt. You don't say green wearing a shirt, he is. Yoda does, right? So those are real rules, and everyone follows those pretty much without thought. The second kind of rules are standard English rules. This is he doesn't have any money instead of he don't got no money. Now, neither one is wrong or right. This is not a matter of right or wrong. One follows the rules of standard English and the other one does not. So when we think of speech acts, it's really important to distinguish right and wrong from standard English rules versus those outside of standard English. There is no such thing as wrong. There's just standard English and not standard English. It's a very important distinction. And then the last set of rules is what I call folklore, what a lot of people call folklore, because these are minutiae that are not real rules, and they're not standard English rules, and they never were. But they're ones that you've been possibly taught over the years. Things like don't end a sentence with a preposition, don't start a sentence with a conjunction, never split an infinitive, never use a sentence fragment. There are a lot of them, okay? These aren't real rules. They don't even exist. So let me go to the next one. Conventions are the rules for the genre. They're what readers expect when you encounter a specific genre. For example, in the example previously of the grocery list, a complete sentence would be ridiculous. You would never make a grocery list and put, go to the store and buy bread. That would be ridiculous. You just put bread. So conventions are the expectations of the reader for the specific genre. And the real rules should almost always be followed, but even then there are exceptions, okay? Maybe you can think of some. The rules of standard English should sometimes be followed, but even in a lot of situations like magazine articles, Good writers break them on purpose because they do it for emphasis. They do it for style. Okay? So rules of standard English should be followed sometimes, but not always. And the folklore, you can follow it if you want to, but you never need to. The important thing is to know your audience and your purpose. So should you use slang? Is your audience going to think of you as like some stuffy, pompous ass if you don't use slang? Or are they going to look at you as stupid if you do use slang? It's really important to understand your audience. You also need to know your purpose. Are you trying to communicate an idea? Are you trying to persuade someone to agree with something? Are you trying to just inform and let people know something? Knowing your purpose also really matters, okay? And then knowing the expectations. What is your audience going to expect? Are contractions okay? Most of the time, yes. But you may have a professor that says, you know what, I don't want you to use contractions, they're too informal. Well, then you shouldn't use them. Most of the time, they're just fine. I would argue that the only time a contraction is not appropriate is when you're writing a letter to the President of the United States, or you're writing a dissertation or something. Other than that, contractions are just fine. Is surprise appropriate? Do you want to throw in some interesting language or little anecdotes or things like that that will surprise your reader? Is that appropriate? You need to understand what your readers are expecting. If you're going to read a recipe and then someone tells a story about catching frogs with their grandchild, you might say, that's really not appropriate for this particular genre. So you want to think about, those are the conventions, and understanding your genre means understanding the conventions as well. So these are just some other myths. You may have been told to never use the word I when you're writing. That is a myth. You should use the word I if you're writing about yourself. If you're not writing about yourself, probably shouldn't use the word I. So it just depends on the situation. Sentence fragment. Like I said, in a grocery list, a sentence fragment's completely appropriate. You just write bread. You don't write go buy bread. And then there are other circumstances where fragments are used just for emphasis, right? So it depends on the context. Again, never use contractions. Like I said before, it depends on what you're writing. Never begin a sentence with a conjunction. This is a really important one. I challenge you to find a piece of writing out there, like in a magazine or a newspaper or something, that doesn't have a sentence that starts with a contraction, like a conjunction, like and or but. The reason they do that is for emphasis, because there's a difference between I brought my sister and my brother, which would be without a period, or I brought my sister, period, and my brother. It means two totally different things. So you can start a sentence with a conjunction if you do it on purpose. It helps with the meaning. There's also the myth that you should never talk about yourself, and that is absolutely untrue. Even in a research paper, sometimes you have experiences that provide incredible evidence and can be some of the strongest evidence in your entire research. So sometimes talking about yourself is incredibly appropriate. It just depends on the context. And the idea that you should never use slang is also genre dependent, and it depends on who your audience is and whether it's important. And there are a lot of myths besides these. These are some of the main ones. But a lot of the rules that you've been taught over the years are not actually rules. They are lies. So, if we take part 1 and part 2, and we take genre, and we take the rules and add the two of them, what's important to understand is that there is no one way to write. The genre determines the rules and the conventions, and these are shaped by the audience and the purpose and the context. All of this together is what determines whether or not something is going to be effective. So the idea that there is only one way to write is completely untrue. And it's really important that you understand as a writer that in order to write effectively, you need to demonstrate that you understand the connection between genre and rules, and that you understand your audience, your purpose, and the context. Which leads me to part 3, the rhetorical situation. So here we have what they call the rhetorical triangle. Every language act is rhetorical. So the definition of rhetoric is the art of effective speaking or writing. It's a skill, it's an art. People practice having effective rhetoric. They practice saying things in ways that will be the most effective. And that is what rhetoric is. So rhetorical means used for effective writing or speaking. And every language act includes 3 parts, and this is what becomes the rhetorical triangle. So every language act includes a user. This is a speaker or a writer. So there's someone who is creating text. And then there's the recipient, which is the speaker or the audience, the reader, the listener, whoever is receiving the message. And then there's the topic itself. There's a text, there's a topic or a subtopic, there's the actual idea that's being conveyed. All 3 of these exist in every single writing or language act. So first let's talk about the writer or the speaker. When you're thinking about being a writer or you're reading something, if you as a writer want to be effective, then you want to convey character. You want to think about who you are as a writer. The character of the writer is called their ethos. So every person has an ethos. When you meet me, I have an ethos. I have a specific character. It's sort of like the aura that surrounds a person. And each writer has that sort of aura. It's the reputation that follows them. For example, I have a PhD, so my name is Dr. Mary Went. Just putting that DR in front of my name gives me a specific reputation, right? So, and that happens with anyone. If someone's a doctor, they have a reputation that follows them just because of their title. The level of formality is part of your ethos. Some people speak in very informal tones, and that makes them a certain person. If they're very formal, it makes them a very different person. Is the person credible? Their level of credibility? Are they likable? Do you trust them? Are they honest and fair? Do they have balance in their writing? All of these things determine whether or not you trust a writer, or whether or not, as a reader, you say, yes, I really like this writer. I trust them. I believe what they're saying, and I buy it. Okay? If the writer has a strong ethos, then the writer does really well in all of these categories, and you can check them off, right? If the writer does not have a strong ethos, they say, you know what? I don't think this author is trustworthy. Bad ethos, okay? All of these things revolve around the effectiveness of writing based on who the writer is. The second thing is the audience. So as a writer, you want to appeal to your audience. As a reader, you want to be appealed to. You want to look for ways that the writer is appealing to you. So knowing how to appeal to your audience to make effective writing is called pathos, or some call it pathos. I pronounce it pathos. There are several things to consider when you want to create a strong pathos in your writing. One is that you want to know what the audience already knows. Knowing what they already know helps them feel good. You don't want to talk down to them and treat them like they're stupid, but you also don't want to assume too much. You need to know your audience well enough to appeal to them at their level. So, and then will they be open and receptive, or are they antagonistic? For example, when it comes to the syllabus, I expect my students to be a little bit of both. I expect them to be mostly receptive because they want to know what's going on in my classroom. But when it comes to restrictions, how they're going to be graded, whether or not I have an attendance policy, for some of that, they're a little antagonistic, right? They're like, I don't want an attendance policy. So there's a little bit of both. And so I need to explain some things more and explain some things less. So knowing your audiences really well. I also need to know who the people are. As a writer, you need to know the demographics. You need to know their morals and beliefs. I can make certain assumptions about my audience when I write a syllabus based on the fact that you are college students. If you're a college student, I can make certain assumptions about you and your level of intelligence, your motivations for being in my classroom. I know that English 101 is required. So that also means that it's very possible a lot of you don't want to be here. And I'm aware of that. And then how do you engage them? How do you persuade them? And that's by appealing to their emotions. Do I want to make you sad? Do I want to make you worried? Do I want to make you confused? Do I want to make you proud? Do I want you to be surprised? There are ways of evoking all these kinds of emotions in your readers or in your listeners. All of that, anything that revolves around the audience is pathos. And then the third part of this is the text itself. Knowing the topic and the issue being discussed and doing it well depends on logic. This is called logos. Okay? And by the way, logos is not plural for logo, and you have to be really careful when you're like Googling and stuff, because a logo is like the Nike swoosh is a logo. We're not talking about logos. We're talking about logos. Okay? So there are ways to make sure that you have, as a writer, a strong logos. One is making sure that you discuss all perspectives, and this is one of the most important parts of being a good writer, is being broad-minded and not closed-minded, because your audience will stop listening if they don't think they're being thought of, considered. You want to be thorough. You want to avoid logical fallacies, bad logic. Okay, and there are hundreds of logical fallacies we could spend time on. You want to make sure that your sources are credible, because if you don't have good, credible sources, then you're not being logical. And you want to provide insight. The reaction you want from your readers is, wow, that person is smart. That means you have a strong logos, right? Do big words make you sound smart? Sometimes, and sometimes they make you sound really dumb, like you don't know what you're talking about. So the text itself and having a strong logos comes from talking about the right things and having the right kind of evidence, backing up your ideas, and looking at things from all perspectives. So let's go back to the rhetorical triangle, right? All of this has to do with an author having a strong ethos, which means they have a good character, right? And you like them. And then pathos means you are appealing appropriately to the emotions of your audience. And then logos means it makes really good sense and you've discussed the things that need to be discussed. So let's add all this together. We have genre, we have rules, and we have rhetoric. When we put all of this together, this is known as the rhetorical situation. Adding everything up is the rhetorical situation. And when you write, you need to know the rhetorical situation. What is this going to be used for? You have to determine your genre. Who needs to hear what it is you have to say? Who is your audience? What is the purpose of what you're writing? What are the conventions and rules you have to follow in that particular genre and for that particular audience and purpose? Who do you want to be as a writer? Do you want to be kind? Do you want to be smart? Do you want to be smart alecky? Do you want to be angry? You have to decide who you want to be as a writer. What emotions do you want your audience to feel? That is also important. You want them to feel something specific, and you need to figure out what that is. And what are the most important points that you need to make in order to sound smart, in order to be logical. A lot of poor arguments come from bad logic. Okay, so it's important that your logic is sound and that you're looking at things from multiple perspectives. That is all of this put together in a nutshell. That is the rhetorical situation.